Well, joining us from Washington to answer that question is Toby Dershowitz. She's the Senior Vice President for Government Relations and Strategy at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks for joining us, Toby. Let's just start with the Caesar Act. Why is it called the Caesar Act?
Thanks for having me on your show today. Caesar was a forensic photographer who worked for the Syrian regime. Initially, his job was to photograph car accidents and things like that. But eventually, Caesar's job was actually to photograph corpses of people who had been tortured, who had been maimed, and who had been burnt by the Assad regime, which is engaged in horrific torture, as the world has come to appreciate. So he was really the hero who smuggled out 55,000 images of these sorts of pieces of evidence. And when he came to testify before Congress some 6 years ago, the House of Representatives was very moved by his story. He later, actually just a couple of weeks ago, came back to the United States again, testified before the Senate once again to provide testimony before the world about the atrocities happening in Syria. And Congress decided, a bipartisan group from Congress decided to name the bill after him.
Now, what are the most important elements of these sanctions that are listed under the Caesar Act?
Sure. Well, as you know, this is not the first set of sanctions against Syria. The U.S. has had sanctions for quite some time. The European Union has, Australia and Japan. But what differentiates these is the following. First of all, there are two parts to these sanctions. The first is it does not allow people who want to help prop up the Assad regime and aid and enable his oppression. It authorizes the U.S. government to sanction those people. And secondly, it enables the U.S. government to sanction those who want to rebuild, who want to engage in reconstruction in areas under the Assad regime's control. It does not, and this is a really important point to mention, it does not affect the areas, or it's not targeted to the areas that are not under the Assad regime's control.
Right. Now, of course, some of the players that are involved in that effort that you just mentioned, Iran, which is already heavily sanctioned by the U.S., and of course, China and Russia are also competing there. So how effective is something like the Caesar Act going to be against those players?
Well, I think, first of all, it's already sent a message, it's already sent a chill to the market for those in the UAE and the Gulf and other areas in Europe who were thinking about participating in this reconstruction. So it's already had a psychological effect. People understand that they've been put to a choice. Either help Assad rebuild parts of the country that he himself has destroyed, or be permitted to transact business with the U.S. financial system. That doesn't just mean in the United States. It means also wherever the U.S. dollar wherever it would touch the U.S. financial system, and that is really worldwide. And so it's already begun to have an impact. Whether it has an impact on Russia and Iran, I can tell you that they're already being pulled into the quagmire that is Syria today. And I think eventually it will certainly have an effect on those as well. Is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. We're not in this for a sprint. We're in this for a long marathon to finally hold accountable the Assad regime. If I may, I would like to just mention one thing, which is the Caesar Act specifically does not sanction humanitarian goods, does not sanction food or medicine. On the contrary, the U.S. has been the largest provider of assistance that goes to the Syrian people, providing since the start of the war in excess of $10 billion in assistance.
Right. I just want to ask you, you say we're in it for a marathon, but why the timing of this now going into effect? Is there something crucial about this period in terms of putting this kind of pressure now on the Assad regime?
That's a great question. So Congress passed the law, as you mentioned. The president signed it into law in December of 2019 and gave 180 days for it to begin to be implemented. And so this past week marked those 180 days. And so we'll see it move forward from here. So as some officials at the State Department have said, this will be the summer of Caesar. those people who were not sanctioned under the current authorities can now be sanctioned, and it can take place at any time.
All right. Well, certainly, as you say, perhaps it will be the summer of Caesar. We've seen very little that has been able to really rein in that regime of Bashar Assad so far over the years. Let's see if this latest step by the United States will have some kind of impact. Toby Dershowitz from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.